everyone, I'm Paige Abbott. I'm a registered psychologist in the province of Alberta. Quick disclaimer and reminder that self-help videos like this are not a replacement for professional assessment and treatment. Rather, they're a nice complement to get you going or to help in your journey. Today I wanted to talk about the ABCs of dealing with difficult moments in our lives. This can be a difficult moment in a relationship, so a conflict that's coming up, a really uncomfortable emotional moment with another person, but it can also apply to moments where we're feeling really triggered or emotionally activated within ourselves. The same principles I do find are very helpful and apply in both scenarios. So what are the ABCs of navigating through these really uncomfortable and difficult moments fairly healthily and effectively? Well, step 1A is to acknowledge. Acknowledge how you're feeling, the level of activation that you're experiencing. Some people will even develop their own internal rating scale so that they're able to really decipher in a moment where they're at in terms of their level of activation. So for instance, if I've developed a 1 to 10 rating scale, just knowing myself and knowing generally what's a 10 out of 10, like how am I feeling physically, emotionally, what happens to my mind when I'm at a 10 out of 10 level. And conversely, what am I feeling and how is that looking when I'm at a lower level? And then doing my best in a moment of conflict or discomfort to do a check-in with myself to say, okay, like I've been talking with this person for a few minutes now. I can feel my heartbeat starting to go. I can feel myself starting to shut down, because I personally engage in more of that freeze response when I'm in a moment of conflict or discomfort. So as soon as I start to see some of those things kicking in, I might say, okay, I'm already at a 5 out of 10. This may not be quite the point where I need to do step B, but maybe I can start to look at ways that I can take care of myself in this uncomfortable moment. So acknowledging the level of activation, how you're feeling. Okay, I'm feeling a 5 out of 10. I'm feeling pretty upset right now. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling frustrated. Very good to acknowledge where you're at. If it's conflict with another person that you feel there's safety and trust with, you may even want to do some of that acknowledgement with them. So verbally saying to them, hey, I'm noticing right now that I'm getting pretty activated. I'm feeling pretty upset or hurt or guilty or whatever the feelings are. And then that might be able to temporarily shift the conversation in that direction of needs. The other person may hopefully ask something to the effect of, okay, so if that's where you're at, what do you need right now? And then deciding how or even if the conversation is going to move forward at that time. Step B is the opportunity to take a break. So if we're starting to feel ourselves climb that emotional activation scale, again, whether it's with somebody else or even with ourselves, we've acknowledged how we're feeling to ourselves or out loud, and we're still noticing that high level of activation. Usually, again, as you get to know yourself, you'll start to know at what point in that activation level that continuing to converse or just stay in that moment with yourself is not going to be helpful. You know from previous experience that if you do, you'll dwell, you'll ruminate, you might spiral even more, and your level of activation is likely to just keep going up and up and up. And again, this can apply just as much with other people in a conversation or in a conflict as much as it can with ourselves. So it's again important to acknowledge how you're doing. It's important to acknowledge that level of activation that's happened, and then starting to look at what are your opportunities for action. And honestly, sometimes the best and the most helpful tool that we can use is to take that break. So to take that pause. Say to the other person, if you're with somebody, hey, I'm noticing again that I'm feeling really activated. There's a lot of emotions coming up. I recognize this is an important thing for us to discuss, but I think we're going to need to take a break. And then discussing where you're going to go, if they're going to take a break as well. You can do some of that triaging to basically discuss your action plan. If it's a moment where you're with yourself, or perhaps you don't feel comfortable sharing with the people around you what's going on, it's still okay to say, hey, I'm just gonna step out. Maybe you leave the gathering that you're in, even if it's not an external issue, but it's more of an internal thing that's happening. I always encourage clients to keep in mind bathroom breaks can be really helpful. So just taking that step out, excuse me, I need to run to the washroom, and just taking a few minutes in the bathroom to self-soothe and to self-regulate using whatever tools you've developed over time to look after yourself. Usually tools in those moments that help us to physiologically settle can be helpful. So certain mindfulness tools, some people will use tapping, just tapping their shoulders back and forth as a self-regulation mechanism. What these tools do is they inform our brains that we are safe, that we're okay, and this allows that level of activation to settle. And now we move from that place of reactivity, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response that we were in when we were feeling activated, to now feeling calmer, more settled. Usually that's when we're starting to feel more clear-headed, and we can approach the situation and the feelings from a different place. If we stay in that level of activation and try to problem solve or cope with things from that spot, usually it's not very helpful and not very productive. People find themselves just spinning like a poor hamster stuck in a wheel that they want to get out of, but they can't. And so it's important to take that break, to step off the wheel. Depending on our level of activation, depending on who you are and what you need, you might need a longer break at times than others. So for some people, at some times, a 2 to 10 minute break is more than sufficient to help them regulate and calm down, so then they can reapproach the situation and whatever was going on prior to that. Or if they're just with themselves, maybe that's when they'll turn to some journaling, maybe reach out to a support person to process what was going on a bit more. But again, we're able to keep moving forward in a healthier and more productive way. After you've taken that break, again, sometimes the break will need to be a bit longer. So especially if it's with somebody that you're conflicting with, it's important that you move to step C, which is the comeback. Agree upon a time where you're going to revisit the issue that you were discussing. I have a lot of clients who are hesitant to take breaks, whether with themselves from their feelings or from others, because they're worried that this is a pattern of avoidance. And I can certainly appreciate the risk. There definitely is the risk that if we leave a situation, or if we momentarily try to step into a different experience from how we're feeling, there absolutely is the possibility that that could be motivated by a desire to avoid. The key thing between avoidance and boundaries is the C, the comeback. So whether it's with ourselves or whether it's with somebody else, it's critical, another C, it's critical that we do the comeback. So we need to come back and revisit whatever it was that was going on. If there's something that can activate us to that level where we need to take a break, then that's a really important thing that we need to explore and learn from, and potentially look at what are our next steps of action with that. So that's certainly not a time to move forward without paying attention to what was going on in the first place that activated us so strongly. So again, if it's with another person, the comeback will need to happen after there's been that break, that pause, that chance for both of you to self-regulate and to just get a little bit more clarity on your thoughts and feelings so that you can revisit that conversation. I've seen in John and Julie Gottman's writings, they're big relationship people who have lots of books and resources out there that I would encourage you to check out. But I've seen in their writings, at least in the past, it was the encouragement that people come back and revisit issues as a couple or in a friendship or relationship within about 48 hours. Because if you go beyond that period of time, then people are usually forgetting even what the issue was, and it really doesn't feel important. And usually if you go beyond that time frame, the risk of going into avoidance, where the comeback doesn't happen or a totally different topic gets brought up, is more likely. So if you're agreeing to come back within that 48-hour time frame, again, for some people that'll be within 10 to 20 minutes of when a discussion started to happen, whereas for others they might recognize they need that longer cool down, so they might actually need to bring it back up the next day. There's no right or wrong with this, but it is important that you and the other person that you're having that discussion with both agree on that comeback. So with the breaks, it's not one person just throwing up their hands and saying, I'm out of here, and leaving. That's not a well-planned or well-communicated break. A break is where there needs to be that acknowledgement that I'm not doing very well right now. This isn't going to go well for us to keep talking. I'm going to take that break, and then I'm going to come back. When would be a time that would work for you? And then you can share if that would work for you or not, and agree upon that comeback. Coming back with yourself, that's where tools like journaling, meditation, reflection, talking it out with a support person, bringing it to a healthcare provider, a counselor, a therapist, a physician, whoever's in your support corner, can be helpful to just come back and look at what was going on there. How were you feeling? What were the triggers to that? And what's the opportunity, and what can you learn from that whole experience? So the comeback is an essential part of self-development and of ongoing recovery work. If we don't do the comeback, that's where we're losing those opportunities for growth and to build awareness and reflection, that we need those moments. So the comeback is an extremely important part of the process, and again is key or critical, to having us be able to acknowledge and move forward with whatever was going on. So critical to have that so that we're having boundaries and dealing with things in a healthy way rather than falling back into avoidance. I hope that you will actively practice and keep in mind the ABCs. Wherever you're at in the process, you may still be working on the A. You may still be working on developing a connection with yourself and your feelings. That's great. I hope that you'll continue to work on that for yourself. You may be now ready to practice the B, taking those breaks. For some people, that is a very challenging thing to do. It goes against their programming. It goes against a lot of their internal pushback, which says, stay and fix this and do more, do better, don't leave until it's done. And so that break can be, again, a very challenging thing to practice. So can the C, because the comeback requires vulnerability, it requires humility. That's where we need to bring our communication skills of listening, paraphrasing, really trying to listen to understand, to engage in empathy, rather than to engage in a debate or, I said, you said, to try to figure out who was right versus wrong. None of that stuff's important in those moments. We want to listen to understand. We want to share honestly and openly about our feelings and our experience. And we want to try to process and come to some perhaps mutual understanding and a bit of resolution, so to speak, meaning that the issue has been processed and both people feel heard. Regardless of the behavioral outcome, it's important that both people are feeling acknowledged, feeling heard in a safe and respectful way. So the whole process is important. Keep working on it step by step. Notice the barriers that come up for you, as well as reinforce the progress that you're making, because it's really important that you acknowledge the steps of change that you're making as you move through this challenging relationship tool. I wish you all the best in your practice of healthy relationships. This is such an important area of personal growth and development for both yourself as well as for others. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for watching.